Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Introduction to Figma series. My name's Carl from UX Toast and welcome back if you've come from the first video. If not, then just welcome. In the first episode we talked a bit about an introduction to Figma, the actual workspace, talked about setting up our styles. So here you can see on the right side I've got my text styles, I've got my colour styles, I've got some shadows going on, and we talked about creating components. So I've got some components over here and some variants and all that fun stuff. And today we're going to talk about what I'd maybe call some more maybe intermediate level features in Figma. So we're going to talk about grids, setting up your grids and why you might want to use grids and why you should be using grids. We're going to talk about the super cool auto layout feature. We're going to talk a bit about accessibility, color contrast, all that kind of fun stuff. And we're also going to talk about like constraints and responsive components and how you may want to approach some of that. So let's jump in. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about grids. So here I'm just pressing A so I can see my artboards on the side. I'm just going to create a desktop artboard so we can talk a little bit about this. So when I've got an artboard selected, and this will also appear when I have like a component selected, I have my layout grids appearing on this right hand side here. So what I'm actually just going to do, I'm going to press the plus straight away, and you can see all these lines coming up. So these are a version of grids. I'm going to talk about the 3 types of grid. So I'm just going to click on here. We have grids, columns and rows. So here I have, this is an 8 pixel grid setup. If that floats your boat, if that's the way you want to work, then that's great. Maybe this is potentially more useful for things such as like iconography. If you're designing your own iconography, you might want to set up something like this, and you can, let's get rid of that quickly. And you know, it helps you like weigh up things a bit easier. But I think the most useful type of grid is a 12 column grid. So I'm going to set all one of these up. Set this over here to columns, excellent, and I'm going to change that to 12. So when I was learning to be a designer, pretty much you had to learn how to use Bootstrap, and Bootstrap is a front-end framework which is built on 12 columns. The reason why 12 columns is so cool is because it's super divisible. You can divide 12, by 6, by 4, by 3, by 2, and by 1. So it gives you quite a lot of flexibility in terms of your layout and how many columns or how many things you might want on your page. So on desktop here I've got my 12 columns. At the minute I've got a 1440 width on my artboard. I want to work with a bit of gutter down the side. I generally like to work with like a 1200 pixel fixed width or like a max width on my desktop. So if I just go in here, I know that if I set 120, that is going to be 1200 pixels from side to side. And if I just show you that 1200 pixels, that's because 1200 plus 120 plus 120 is 1440, which is the desktop viewport we're working on here. And as I say, so 12 is super divisible, so you can divide it by, if I want two 6 column grids, that's something I can do, and that's really easy. I can also do 4, as I said here, and I can get 3 going on there. I can also do 3, and I can have 4 of those. Come back here, not running off my artboard, boom boom, and you can see how you just get a load of flexibility in terms of 12 columns. So I like to work with a 12 column grid generally when I'm designing desktop experiences. So now I have that, let me just quickly go back into here and we'll talk a little bit more about what's going in here. So I have my count. You can maybe do 6 or something like that when you go down to like a mobile viewport, but for now I'm just going to stick it to 12. This is the color. I'm a fan of a bright pink, so FF00FF, let's just put that in and that will be the color. You can change the opacity if you want it really strong, but generally you want this to be quite light because you need to be designing on top of this grid. You can change the alignment of it. We're going to keep it stretch at the minute because then it will help us, it will grow with us. And I'm going to change the gutters of this to be 24. I like to work in a 8 pixel spacing. So 24 is a multiple of 8. Perfect. So what I'm actually going to do quickly is I'm going to save this. Let me just get rid of that one. I'm going to go into, as we learned last time, this is our styles. So we've saved things such as colors and typography in the last episode, and we can also save our grids. If I know I'm going to be using this, I just call this 12 col. Awesome. And the home page, which is over here, very conveniently, this is one I made earlier. The layout grids, because I've now made it, and you'll see that things line up. It's almost like I use this grid, which is perfect. Oh, is that a pixel out? No, it's not, it's a shadow. Oh, that would have been embarrassing. So we now have the grid aligning onto this, and this is the grid that I used when I was designing this, so I can now see that everything is lining up. I've got things which are 4 columns wide, I've got things which are 3 columns wide, I've got things which have an offset column, so it will sit in one column. So that's the use of these grids, and it helps you create just consistency. It's a generally really good design to be designing with these grids. And we can also do other types of grids. So if I go into here and I want to add another grid, let me just delete this grid quickly. I'm just going to add a couple of grids on here. Can I do my 12 column? I can't. So I'm just going to add this grid. I want to have this as a column. I want 12 columns here. I know I want 24, I want this, there's 120. So I've got my vertical columns here, so I can create horizontal rhythm. So I have my vertical columns which allow me to create rhythm going across, but maybe I also want to create rhythm up and down, going vertically, so I can create a horizontal grid here, so I can create rows. In fact, let me just add a new one on top of this. So I'm going to go to here, grid, and I can change this to rows. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this to be auto, so I want it just to do as many times as it is because I just want it to keep growing. I want to have an 8 pixel margin, maybe 8 pixel gutter, and I want to do these from the top, and I want them to be 8. So now what this is saying is that from the top it's going to be 8 pixels height, and each one of these is 8. So now you have like an 8 pixel vertical rhythm going on. Which if I just save this now, so these two, I'm going to save these as, I'm just going to save it as test for now because this isn't something I personally use. I think this just gets a bit, it gets a bit too constraining, and you know, you want a bit more flexibility. But if I go into here, 12 column, if I just put my test column going on here, you'll actually see that everything lines up to this grid. The reason everything lines up to this grid is because I design with 8 pixel spacing, 8 pixel line height, so everything is going to align to this 8 pixel vertical rhythm without me needing to find those spaces. So for example here, my title 1, we set up with 64 pixel line height, which is a multiple of 8, so everything is lining up to these 8, so it just creates a nice rhythm going down, and then you get consistent spacing. Again, you can see how all of the outlines, all the sizes on my text are lining up. Aligning up to the edge of here, and everything's just really nice. It just creates that really nice rhythm going up and down. So that's a little bit on grids. I'm actually going to switch this back out from the test one to my 12 column one, just because it lets me see a little bit nicer there. And I'm going to remove that. So that's a little bit on grids, and that's, you know, generally the way that you should be using them. You should be designing with grids. It's a really good best practice to get a hold of. The next thing I want to talk about is auto layout. Auto layout is really cool and it's super powerful, and one thing that you may have noticed in the last time, we didn't create a button component. I don't have a button on here, but you know, really maybe I should be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain auto layout with a button component, and we're just going to have a little bit of fun with it as we're going along. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to press A, and I'm just going to create a frame. I'm going to drag out a frame there. I know, so I'm going to talk about a little bit of accessibility as we're going along here, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is touch targets. So generally your touch targets on, so when I say touch target, I mean the touchable size on an interactive component. So here I'm creating a button, and the minimum touch target size should be 48 pixels. You'll hear different numbers from different guidelines such as Apple or Microsoft, but generally you should be aiming for at least 48 pixels as it avoids like fat thumbs. But I'm going to go just for 56. You know, 48 is a minimum, but I like to have my buttons maybe a little bit bigger. I'm going to change it to my primary blue, add a little bit of a border radius onto this, because this is like the container for my button, for example. I'm going to put a bit of text in here, button, lovely copy, and I'm going to change this to my body bold, and I'm going to make it my white. So let's just say that's my button component. I could right now go up here, turn this into a component like we learned last time, but you know, I've got a bit of spacing going on the sides, so you know, I could put this 24 pixels from the side, and then I could resize this like that, and you know, maybe that's quite lucky, that's 24 pixels. But then every time I change the copy inside my button, I'm going to have to resize that, and I don't want to have to do that every time. So the way that we can get around that is by using auto layout. So I'm going to click on my frame here, and up here on the right hand side you can see auto layout. So I'm going to press the plus on that, and what that's done is that's actually just created this as an auto layout frame. If I click on here where it says mixed, you'll see I have the paddings going on. So I'm just going to center align my text in the button. I have 12 pixel on the top and bottom, that's fine, I'm happy with that, and I've got 24 pixels on the side. Maybe I wanted to have 16 pixels on the top and the bottom, I can do that. Maybe I want to have 16 pixels on the right and left, and I can also do that. But I'm happy with the 12 pixels and the 24 pixels, as it allows me to have 56 pixel button, and that still aligns up with my 8-point rhythm as I was talking about earlier. And the good thing about this now, I can now change this and it will grow as I'm going along. So now every time if I turn that into a component, which I will do actually, so let me just do that. I'm going to call that button, I'm going to go over here and look behind my camera, and I'm just going to create that as a button component. The cool thing about this is, let me just find an icon quickly. Let's just use the toast icon for now. Let's say I wanted to have an icon in my button. If I copy that in, I just need to make sure my alignment is looking good. I just center align these. So I could actually just drop a button in there and I can move things around. I could have an icon before, and now if I just go up here, bring in a button, and if I go into my layers and I hide this, maybe I can just delete it and it will just resize as I'm going. So I can just keep adding things in here if I really wanted to. I don't know why I'd want to, but you can. That's the flexibility of auto layout. So that's probably the most simple version of auto layout, but you can also do some quite cool things. You can stack auto layouts. You can put auto layouts within auto layouts within auto layouts, and it can just keep going indefinitely. So as I said, let me just create in a new button. So that's my button component, which I've literally just created. I'll create a few of these. So there we go, I've got 4 here. And one thing you can do, I can just go in, just change some colors if I really want to. I don't know why you would want to, but you can do that. You can do these things. Let me just change these from white to blue, for example. Cool. So if I highlight these, let me remember the shortcut, Shift A. Shift A, that's created an auto layout frame. So that's turned that into a frame. It's turned that selection into a frame, and it's turned it into an auto layout frame. So straight away you can see here, I've got my 0 spacings all around the outside. If I just put 16 spacings around, in fact I'll just go here and I'll put 16 so it's all the way around. You can see my 16 is now been added to the top, right, and I also have this 33 that's just appeared. So that's the spacing between the components within my auto layout frame. If I change that to 16, you can see how they all, smush up together a little bit more. I can also then keep adding things onto this. Generally, you wouldn't use buttons in this way. You wouldn't use an auto layout frame to create 5 CTAs on a page. You can be a bit more creative with it, but this is just an example of how to use this. So now I have turned that into a auto layout. Let's say I can keep going with this. So I could, if I just turn another frame and I just go around that, I just do that. I can then turn this into a auto layout frame. You can see how the spacing all aligns there. I've got 41 pixels between my thing. Let me just change it to 32. So I've now got 32 between these two things. 16 pixels padding around the entire outside. Just an example. And here you can see I've got these arrows. So because these are stacking, this group is stacking on top of this group, it's stacking downwards. I'm using downwards arrow. If I wanted to do them sideways, I can do that. And you'll see if I go within here that it uses the horizontal direction. So you can be a bit flexible with that. But now again, I've got this as an auto layout frame. If I duplicate this, it can just keep going down. And if I just turn this one to a different color quickly, you can see how I can swap these things around. And they all move about. So there's a lot of, you can use auto layout on just about everything. I could use it on these components as I was creating them if I wanted to. Sometimes it's perfect. Sometimes you can use auto layout and it just makes sense. It allows components to stretch, like this button, like how I'd want this button to do. You can use it to create grids and to make sure your spacing's consistent, but you don't want to overdo it with auto layout. So auto layout can become really restrictive. For example here, I've got 16 pixels on the image, but then I've got 24 pixels here. Don't allow the auto layout restrict the design that you want. In this example, I don't want auto layout. It just doesn't make sense for me. But then in this example, I do want auto layout. So just learn how's best for you to be using auto layout. Cool, so we talked a little bit earlier about some accessibility things you can be doing in the form of touch targets and minimum touch target sizes. I'm also going to talk a little bit about contrast ratios. So you want to make sure that you've got a strong enough contrast ratio so that people with visual accessibility needs are able to view your UI in the way that anyone else would be able to. And contrast is a big part of that. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about a really cool plugin that you should be using. If I just create these two blocks, so as you can see here, I've got this white button and this blue background, and I want to make sure that the contrast on that is enough so that someone with visual accessibility needs will be able to view that. So I've just created these two blocks and I find it the easiest way to do it. And up here I've got this plugin called Stark, and in here I can check the contrast. So what's this telling me? So I've got a ratio of 4.17 to 1, and Stark gives you a really good overview of how accessible that is. Accessibility is generally split into AA and AAA. You want to be aiming for a minimum of AA when designing experiences, and some things you need to be aiming for a minimum of AAA. In this scenario, I can aim for a minimum of AA, and I'm happy with that. But if I was creating maybe like a fintech experience, like a banking experience, I may want to aim for AAA. I think potentially you may even have to legally aim for a AAA. But as this is just a fun thing for people learning a bit about UX, I'm happy with a AA. So here you can see things are split into normal text and large text. You can see I'm failing normal text. I've got a red cross there, which is I need to get a minimum of 4.5 to 1, but I'm passing large text. So large text is any text which is 18.6 pixels and bold, or 24 pixels, or larger than both of those. In this example, if I go to my button is, let me just click on here, body bold, 20 pixels. You can see here, really faded out there, ironically, 20 pixels, so, and it's bold. So in this scenario, this is classified as large text, so I am passing AA accessibility. But if I got rid of the bold, for example, if I just went to body regular, this would no longer be accessible because it's 20 pixels, but it's not bold, which is now classified as normal text. So that would not pass AA. But in this scenario, this does pass AA. That's great. That's what we are aiming for. So we're all happy with that. So the last thing I want to talk about is responsive components and constraints. And the best way for me to probably talk about this is in the form of the navigation. I'm just going to create an artboard here quickly, which is 1440. Change it to 72, as this is probably the size of my navigation. And here you can see my navigation sits on a dark. So I'm just going to change that. Let me just take this over here so we can play with it in this artboard, in this frame. Cool. So first I'm going to talk about constraints. So constraints are the way that an element will move when an artboard is resized effectively. So if I just have a look at this, I've got 120 pixels spacing on the outside of these things, so on the logo on the left and on the nav elements on the right. At the minute, if I click on any of these, you can see on the right hand side here I have a section called constraints. And here I have the two blue parts here as the top and the right on the logo, and on the nav elements on the links I have it on the top and the right. So that means if I create both of those were aligned to the top, so if I make it bigger it stays at the top, and if I go up it still aligns to the top. And this was aligned to the right and that was aligned to the left, which means that if I then make this a bit smaller, you can see how the spacing stays at 120 on the outsides, and it's just this middle spacing here, which is that's the real estate that can be used, so isn't really getting in the way until around this point, until like 800 pixels or so, where things are becoming a bit squished. So if I just put this back to 1440, so that's one way that you can use constraints when creating responsive components, because this could potentially be a component that works for all my desktop sizes from 1440, and let's say if my desktop sizes went down to 1200 or so, whatever breakpoint I decided I want to work with, that would still work. This still works going down to like 968. So this could be a component that works across all those different sizes. But what happens when you do have these smaller sizes, these 800 pixels, all the way down to the mobile sizes? Generally, the way I would like to work on this is I'd create a component with two variants. I'd create maybe a desktop and a mobile, or if you needed a tablet in there as well, that's fine. So I'm just going to create a new version of this. I'm just going to I did Command D, which is duplicate. So I'm going to get rid of the links, and I'm just going to create the mobile version of this. So if I go down to 375. So I'd want smaller padding on the sides here, 64, maybe just go down to 24. And maybe I want a hamburger menu. I don't have an icon ready, so I'm just going to draw one quickly. Just go something like that. That looks nice. How much space? 8 pixels, 8 pixels, glorious. That is our hamburger menu. In fact, maybe I can get a little bit of border radius. Oh, that's nice. That's beautiful. 24 pixels. Let's just center align it quickly. Cool, that'll work. So now let's say I wanted this as my component for desktop, but then this is my mobile. What I would generally do here is I'd create these two. You can turn them into components, but if you name them in a certain way, so if I call this nav/desktop, and I call this one nav/mobile, excellent, and I turn this into a component, and I turn this into a component. Now if I go into assets, I can see I've got over here, I've got this section called nav. And the reason that is grouped together automatically like that is because of the naming convention of the way I've named them. So nav/something means that anything with nav space / is going to be grouped together. So if I just go over here and I put in my desktop, so my desktop one, as we already have the sizes, it can go all the way from all the way up to whatever size down to 900. Potentially, you may even want to name it in that way. So if I just go into my layers, I could actually maybe put some comments in here. So here I've got a description. I could say anything from 1440. I'll put like 968 to 1440, which means that any other people who were using that component would know, okay, that's the sizes that I want to do here. This one could be anything less than 968. Have I done that the wrong way? Less than, more than, that way? Less than, that's less than, yeah. Just for example, so someone can do it like that. So when I get down to 968, I can switch this out to the mobile one, and in here they're grouped as instances as well, as the naming convention has already done that. So if I just take this down to, I'd want to change the alignment on that one, the constraints, so now that will grow out with me. Awesome. So that's just how I would approach responsive components, and a little bit into constraints as well. Awesome, so that's everything I had to talk about in this episode. I hope you found it useful. In the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about maybe some of the more practical uses of Figma, such as prototyping for when you're moving things into user testing, or maybe just to show an experience to stakeholders, and a little bit about handing over to engineers. So in order for our designs to turn into real pieces of internet, to put these on the web, on an actual website, we need to be working really closely and really efficiently with engineers. So I'll be talking a little bit about how you can be working best with engineers, and how you can be using Figma to make that process as easy as possible. So I hope I see you again in the next episode.